So my motivation was to tell a story that hadn't fully been told. We have such a thriving Māori journalism scene, but it wasn't being documented and it wasn't accessible. What worried me the most is that it wasn't accessible to children coming through school, any school, wasn't accessible to kids coming through kura kaupapa, Māori language education, and there was nothing in the journalism schools about Māori language journalism. So I was just concerned that there was this big hole and that it needed to be filled and that we needed to tell these stories because they're really important. Journalism shapes not only how we see ourselves, but how we see the world. And I wanted to make sure that that understanding was lost. Yeah, I wanted to make something that would be something that not only documents the field, but just makes all those journalism leaders, all the journalists of today really proud, so they could say, this is what I do, and this is how it works. So I know that journalism anywhere sticks to the tenets of accuracy, fairness and balance, but journalism is also culturally contextualised. It springs from a particular culture. So I wanted to know how news gathering in the Māori world differed and what principles were at work there. The focus of the PhD was to look at how culture influences news gathering, how Te Reo Māori influences news gathering, and how the funding regime influences news gathering in the Māori world. What are the forces at work in Māori language journalism? How does culture intersect? How does the language revitalisation gender intersect? How does culture and language intersect? And I was absolutely fascinated by those, but I wanted to get into the depths in the kaupapa. Well, I hate to say it to the methodology purists out there, but the methodology chapter went completely. That was kind of the PhD show you process, and that wasn't relevant to the book. So even though I think my methodology was wonderful, video ethnography and doing all sorts of linguistic analysis, that had to come out. So the methodology had to come out, the history needed to be shortened somewhat, and of course there are other things in a PhD that you don't translate to the book. So for example, in your PhD where you have to state your niche and occupy it and assess what your work is going to add to the canon, that obviously doesn't need to go into a book. Unlike the thesis, the book was about readers being able to follow a thread right through. You can definitely see the thesis is there, but it's simplified, it's made into a more engaging, simpler narrative. I was just trying to keep it as accessible as possible, using very everyday language. So a little more personable, simpler narrative, but the main questions that were in the PhD are still answered. I was able to take my novel writing style, take the idioms out for the PhD, of course, and say I'm kind of idiomatic writer, so as a journalist, but it was about keeping the same voice, but still keeping that authoritative tone, making sure that all of my statements were backed up, that I was striking that balance between very dry and academic and journalistic. So it was about, for both thesis and book, finding that easy reading style. Probably in the rewriting and the preparing for publication, the pick research was the biggest job, and getting the pictures and then recording which ones I used and letting the libraries know. But that was really important. By the time we got to the book, I knew them quite well, and I'd often gone back to them several times as supplementary questions, and they were really supportive because, of course, I had to get their permission to add this new stuff, and I had to get their permission to use these photos. It was quite exciting for them because the book, PhD in which they'd participated, was going to be in a book that they could actually take and show and use in their newsrooms and show to people what they might be teaching. One of them said it was a real taonga because there is now something that sums up everything they've been striving for. Not just them, but the generations prior who set up Māori language, who created the conditions for Māori language and Māori journalism to thrive. I already had a relationship with Huia before I decided to inquire about the book. Huia runs a Māori language, runs a short story competition that I entered in 2017, and one of my stories was published in Te Reo Māori, one of their books. So I already knew the publishing house. And through the short stories, I got to know the co-director of Huia, Ebony Waitiri. And so when I was thinking about whether this was worthy of the book, I went to her and sounded her out. and sent her the thesis for me to read, for her to read. So she read the thesis. She had a couple of colleagues read the thesis, and word came back, yes, we think it could make a good book. So I know a lot about journalism and journalistic publishing. I know nothing about books. So I had to rely on direction from Ebony Waitiri, who was my contact with Huia. She oversaw production of the book. So she liaised with designers, the editors, because they had an English language editor go through it and a Māori language editor go through it, because there's a lot of bilingual passages in the book. Then it went to a designer. So what basically happened is Ebony managed the process, but she liaised with the designers and the editors. And when she had a proof she wanted me to look at, she'd send it to me. Then once the book was published, responsibility turned to their marketing department. So I'm now working with their marketing department on getting the book out there. If journalists want to interview me, they go through her. The rewriting itself didn't take me too long, but there was a lot of painstaking going through proofs, picking up errors, reading through the index when it came out. So lots of checking, lots of waiting for things to come back to me. So it was quite a long process, but that doesn't mean I was busy the whole time. So it ended up being quite a lengthy process. And also, when you work with any publishing house, your book may not be the priority. So you're in a queue of other books. So you also have to be quite patient. So my book went to China to be printed, which meant they had to factor in shipping time as well. So it can be, I think the production can be a longer process than the rewriting. I think it's really important to be aware that the audience for your thesis and the audience for your book may be different people. If you are going to do a book, what is your motivation to do the book, and who are you going to aim at it? What are they going to get from it? You need to really, you need to be able to dissuade a publisher that there is a book in your thesis, and you need to be able to articulate it. Now, on top of that, you need to build some relationships with publishers if you can. So if you know anybody in the publishing world, seek their advice. Talk about the idea. Go and get some feedback on whether people in your field would be interested to see it as a book. You will have to do a rewrite. There's no point just publishing a thesis that's already outlined as a book. You're going to need to revamp it. Think about design, think about photos like I did. Didn't have to think about photos in my PhD. Suddenly when I had the book to do, photos became critical. So you need to be very certain about why you're doing it, what's motivating you to do it. And you have to be aware that unless you're an academic job already, you will probably have to do rewriting in your own time. One of the hard things I think in translating a thesis into a book is finding your authorial voice, because there is a different way to communicate to different audiences. I think if you are thinking about a book, you do need to think about illustrations. You need to think about anywhere you go, where you might be taking images, make sure they're on quality, make sure you get high quality PDFs, make sure you store them where you can find them. So I think that's what I would advise. If you're even thinking remotely about a book, think about illustrations and where you might get them from and who you would need to get permission from to reproduce. Just collect them as you go. Because the process of getting a book published is quite a lengthy one. You need to have good relationships with the publishing people you're working with. There's a lot of work in working out what has to be excised, what needs to go, what you might need to add. You need to be always thinking of the audience and what they need. I'm hoping that this fills a gap, tells us something they didn't know before, and puts the Māori journalism that they see on screen and online in context. I'm hoping that the book inspires people to become journalists, because we're still really short of Māori journalists and Māori language journalists. I hope it helps people understand the struggles that people went through to create space with Te Reo Māori and Māori news and Māori culture, tikanga Māori. I'm hoping that in some way it can change people's mind, inspire them, inform them, but I'm hoping that as a sort of secondary benefit of this book, people might understand better how news gathering works. It's one of those things you just release your manu bird and just hope that it flies to where it needs to be.